Good afternoon, everybody, and we're going to get started with our session here. Hope everybody's energized and refreshed after lunch, hopefully feeling a little bit warm from the sunshine outside and everything. It's just beautiful out there. You are in the session, First Nations People and Trauma, and we have as presenters the Ho-Chunk Nation Youth Services, La Crosse Youth and Learning Center, and who are also the First Nations Cultural Liaisons for the School District of La Crosse. And those individuals are Henry Greengrass, who is the Center Director, Elizabeth Digby-Britten, the homeschool coordinator, Vince Hamilton, also a homeschool coordinator, Tracy Littlejohn, homeschool coordinator, and very special guest with us as well. Want to recognize Lynette Walker, Ho-Chunk Nation Youth Services Division Director. Welcome. Oh.
All right, so we're going to try and do a 2-hour training in an hour. So I will talk really fast, and we're going to try and have time at the end for questions as we get to it. So there's a video we usually watch that's about 1 hour and 13 minutes, and those of you who got a handout, the link is on there. At the end, if you want us to email you a handout, we can certainly do that, so we'll have you come up and just provide us your email address, and then we can send you the handout that we only made 40 copies of. That was me. So with that, we're going to kind of get started, and I'm going to have Henry take over. Oh, okay, he's saying no. All right, so it'll be me. Forgive me. So one thing I like to go over is just the stages of understanding. Whenever I go out and talk, I can kind of tell in people when they start to shut down, especially when we're challenging kind of history as it's been taught up until this point. Our story doesn't always get told. And so when you're sitting through this, it's very easy for people to kind of deny that this actually happened. There's a lot of times some disbelief, sadness, guilt, shame. We hope you get to the point of acceptance and then become an authentic ally for us and to help share this information with your peers, your coworkers, because we don't want anyone to feel bad about this history, but we have to teach it. So we understand there's a difference with intent versus impact. Our intent is not for anyone to walk out of here and feel bad, but we do realize that that is sometimes the impact. So, and then for our Native relatives that are in the room too, we just want to remind everyone as we get started that we have resilience. We survive, we are alive, we strive, and we thrive. So keep that in mind as we go through this, because these aren't always easy for us to talk about or to hear about either. So we just have to keep these things in mind as we do this. So what I would like you to do, if you have paper with you, if not, you can just do this in your head. This is something I like to do with especially youth when we talk about this, is I want you to think back to the name of your favorite person who lived in your house growing up with you. Who was your favorite person that you lived with? Then provide the name of your closest friend growing up or even now. Who's your closest friend? And this might be easier. Your favorite outfit, you could do your favorite outfit now or favorite item. Some people have really nice shoes they like to wear once in a while. Purse. Sometimes we also, so just think about your favorite outfit. Next one, your favorite possession. And this would be one of those things like my phone is probably one of my favorite possessions. So what is your favorite possession? Then your favorite name for yourself. My mother and father named me Elizabeth. They were determined I was going to be Elizabeth my entire life. In kindergarten, I decided Beth was much easier to write because that Z was terrifying. So for me, growing up, my favorite name probably would have been Beth. And then your first language. So the first language you were speaking in your home when you were little. So kind of write those items down, and we'll get back to that. So think about that. All right. Just to give you a little overview, if you're not familiar with our tribes here in Wisconsin, we have 11 federally recognized tribes and 1 federally unrecognized tribe. So we have 6 Ojibwe bands. Lekutare, which is what I belong to, Lac de Flambeau, Red Cliff, Bad River, Mole Lake, and St. Croix. So we're all Ojibwe. And what the federal government did is it was easier to split us up into 6 smaller groups. So for those of you who teach middle school and high school, imagine if you had all 7th grade together or all the freshmen together, you split them out because it's easier to work with them in smaller groups. That's what happened with us. And then we were divided out according to our hunting parties. And then we have Menominee, Ho-Chunk, Potawatomi, Oneida, and the Stockbridge Mohicans. Now, understanding our names, as Ojibwe people, our history books call us Chippewa a lot. We're Ojibwe or Ojibwa, which is where Chippewa came from. Menominee, then the Ho-Chunk too, your history books will often call them Winnebago, not what they prefer to be called, so Ho-Chunk. And the Stockbridge Mohicans, your history books call them Stockbridge Muncie, and that's the name of a town, so Stockbridge Mohicans. And then our one federally unrecognized tribe is Brothertown. And I could spend a lot of time just talking about the history of the tribes here in Wisconsin, but we won't get done what we need to get done, so we'll just kind of give you that as an overview. All right, we were having a great discussion earlier with a middle school teacher about how they teach about the German Holocaust, right? They make sure in sometimes 7th grade or 8th grade to teach about the German Holocaust. The thing that we often don't want to talk about is the Holocaust that happened right here. And when we look at numbers and statistics, for Native Americans, our numbers of how many of us died during that time period were about 10 million to 114 million. I believe during the Holocaust in Germany, they estimate it between 6 and 10. Unfortunately, I don't like to say we win at having the biggest Holocaust, but we have bigger numbers, but we don't talk about this history. And that's what we need to discuss a little bit. So we're gonna watch a video, about 13 minutes of it, if you wanna go ahead and get to it, where we're gonna watch a video that's gonna tell stories, and it's gonna come from our elders, which is how we prefer to teach anyways, that you hear directly from some of our elders and their experience with residential schools. It goes very quickly in the beginning. See how much of the facts you can catch when they give kind of the history. Hold on, technical support here. So like I said, it'll go, it's supposed to turn green.
A long time ago, before you were born, the old people told a story about a visit from the wisdom keepers. The wisdom keepers told us the lightskins are coming, and their numbers would be great. They will bring great destruction and confusion, that we will go through a time of testing. They will bring 4 mind changers to make us forget our ways. The mind changers would be a liquid, a black book, a song, and a card. They will take your land. They will poison the earth. They will bring disease and sickness. They will kill the women and the children. They will destroy our culture. Only our spirituality will be left. After the testing time, a great healing will take place. The eagles will come back. The buffalo will come back. We will come back. The prophecies will come true. We are now in the time of the fulfillment of prophecy. The story that happened has never been told. Now is the time to tell the story.
Genocide tactics, as defined by the United Nations. Number 1, killing members of the group. An example of that would be the Wounded Knee Massacre. Number 2, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. A good example of that would be the 1862 mass hanging. Number 3, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction, in whole or in part. A good example of that would be the longest walk made by the Navajo Nation or the Cherokee Trail of Tears. Number 3, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. The United States government sponsored sterilization of Native American women. Number 4, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. In 1879, in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, the first of 500 boarding schools. It happened here in the United States of America. Some of the genocide tactics included massacres, forced relocations, sterilizations of women, boarding schools. California alone paid $12 million on Indian bounties. After the atrocities, only about 1% of the native population remained, making this perhaps the largest genocide of the 20th century. Genocide was sanctioned under 24 U.S. presidents from 1830 to 1933. Manifest Destiny, a term that was coined in 1839 and revised in 1845 to sanction the colonization of North America. It was used to designate the belief that the United States was destined, even divinely ordained, to expand across the North American continent. Thousands were murdered and relocated in the name of Manifest Destiny. By 1920, 99% of all Native Americans were wiped out. In 1879, the U.S. government implemented the genocide tactic of removing the children from their native culture and placing them in one of the 500 new boarding schools. This was an attempt to eradicate the Native American culture and assimilate those children into European culture. In 2008, a gathering took place in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The purpose of this gathering was to talk about intergenerational trauma. The pain and hurt at this conference was so intense that the elders instructed us to make a 7,000-mile journey across the United States. We traveled to current and former boarding schools to gather these stories from the people who attended when they were children. We recorded the stories of what happened to them. Here are their stories.
The stories that we heard on this journey from these elders were so unbelievable. Some of the elders, they even had a very difficult time even talking about what went on there. Many of the elders who told the stories of what happened to them was the first time that they ever told a story to anybody, even their children, their spouses. No one had known the experiences that they had in these boarding schools as children.
Said he liked this boarding school. Well, I, for one, hated the damn place. And I can start out with, I don't know if anybody here remembers their life when they were 6 years old. I do. It was right here at this boarding school that, I'm going to mention that name, Mr. Care. Boy, did I hate that son of a bitch. I mean, really, really hate. And I didn't know I was supposed to ask this man for permission. I'd come back that evening and, then he knocked the hell right out of me. There's a window there. He'd shut it, make sure nobody saw it. And when I got back, damn, he just whipped me all over my damn body. I mean, he knocked the hell right out of me. And neither one of us knew how to cry because we weren't supposed to cry.
It is said, "The truth shall set you free." The stories we heard on the journey of the beatings of the children for speaking their language, the violence to the children, the punishment system, the sexual abuse is directly tied to our current day community issues of alcoholism, drug abuse, violence, and sexual abuse. This is called intergenerational trauma.
Because this happened over 100 years ago, 130 years ago, and that historical trauma passes on from generation to generation. And we see many angry young people and others who don't even know why they're angry. And if we look back, we're treating the symptoms, but if we look back, we'll find the root causes go back to this time. When genocide took place.
I remember me and my friend, another girl, well, she was my relative from Cheyenne River. We were in the dormitory and we went out the back door, and it was the roof, and we didn't realize it was the roof, but we went back in, and that night we had, they called our names. They called a whole bunch of little girls' names, and so we all got in line, and the sister opened this door, and she took one little girl in there, and pretty soon that little girl was just crying, and she came out, and then the next one, and we realized they were getting whipped in there, and when it was my turn to go up there, and I went in there, and that sister told me that I was on the roof, and I was somewhere I weren't supposed to be, and so they pulled our pants down, and that was our first whipping. The first day I got there, the first night, that was my experience with the first day at boarding school.
I'm the last in the family of 9 children. My oldest brother went to boarding school, never came back. Only his body was brought back. And I had 2 other sisters, later years, lost their lives to alcoholism. I come from a family of alcoholism.
And yes, there was sexual abuse in our time. Yes, there was. But we weren't allowed to talk about it. We were given cod liver oil by the tablespoonful for talking Indian. We were slapped with yardsticks for talking Indian, for whispering, or wanting to go to church. We couldn't have a best friend. They'd break us apart. Like someone said, they got separated because they were too close. And that's the way it was. And that's the way it was in boarding school.
As soon as we got to the school, they cut our braids off. They didn't even have the courtesy to unbraid it. They just chopped them off.
All right, now I got to see if I turned it back on. I did. So who caught some of the different statistics? How much did California pay in bounty for Native Americans? Anyone catch that? 12 million. How many U.S. presidents sanctioned the genocide of Native people? 24. Do our schools teach about manifest destiny? How does that impact your Native students when they're learning about manifest destiny and how wonderful it was? Are we teaching the other side to that? So that's one of those things to think about when we're teaching our U.S. history, when we want to talk how great the presidents were, and we want to talk a lot of that up. For our Native students, it has a different impact. So this trauma, this history, some of them know it, some of them don't exactly, but they know that the government hasn't always treated Native people well. Okay. This shows you, anyone catch what our population is now? We went from, was it? 1% left, right? 99% of the population has been wiped out from the start of when the settlers came, disease, different things have wiped us down to about less than 1%. This also shows you, this map then shows you land usage. We used to own 100% of the land. And now we're down to, I don't know if that's 10%. I don't know if I have any really good math people in here. So that's something to keep in mind too when we talk about this land. Who originally owned it or who originally inhabited it. So,
And also
skip
keep in
that one.
mind that all that reservation or trust property, it's held in our name by the federal government. We have to have permission to cut down a tree. If your family owns trust property, you want to build a house, you can't even use that land as collateral to get a loan. So that impacts us in an economic way tremendously that most people don't even realize. Yeah, you have to have permission. The rest of the family has to say, yes, you can build a house here. And then you have to go through the BIA and your tribes to get a house built on land that's in your name, but the government still controls everything.
Thank you. With that too, when we were teaching about the Holocaust in Germany, one of the things to know is, here are two different pictures. One is Wounded Knee, and one is a picture from Germany during the World War II and at a concentration camp. They're almost indistinguishable. I still have a hard time remembering which one is which picture. I believe as you look at it, the one on the right is from Wounded Knee, the one on the left is from Germany. And the thing to know is Hitler loved what the US government did to Native people and how we set up reservations here. That's how he set up concentration camps. He used a lot of the same tactics. So if we're gonna teach about the Holocaust in Germany, that is something we should be sharing, okay? We need to talk about that, the correlation between the two different genocides. And this just lists some of the different lives that have been lost through different conflicts with the government, the natives versus sometimes the government and the different wars. I'm gonna kind of make sure we have time. So when we talk about, also in history, we teach that we have the right to practice our religion, right? Freedom of religion. We teach our students that. But for Native people, this right did not get passed until 1978 when the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed into federal law. So we did not have that right the whole time. And
so, if you guys could imagine, how many of you guys go to church? I don't. I'm not Christian. But could you imagine, I didn't have a right to practice my own religion until 1978. Can you believe that? Now, what if this were true for Christianity? You know, that's something to think about.
he's not going to tell a story. I was born in 1975. Henry was born in 1974. So those are kind of things to think about when this is in our lifetime that these things have passed. With that too, the right to vote. This is always an interesting story. Anybody know how many generations United States citizen you might be? So if you had family that immigrated here, how many generations have you been here? 2? Okay. On my Ojibwe side, I'm only considered 3rd generation United States citizen. My grandfather was born in 1922, and at the time, he was not considered a United States citizen. He actually didn't even get a birth certificate. And so he was able to do all kinds of things, and when he went to retire, he had to prove he'd been born, which is really interesting. How do you prove you've been born, right? So long story with that anyways. So for a lot of us, that being considered a citizen, and then there's some states that tied it to you couldn't vote until you were the 1970s. There were a few states that delayed that right as well. So when we talk about that right to vote in our schools and that, I mean, again, this ties in there. Go ahead. So back to the residential schools though, a little bit, history here. So Colonel Pratt, he is the one who set up the Carlisle Indian School, and his belief was to kill the Indian but save the man. And so that's what he set up the residential schools to be. You can go to the next one. So for our residential schools, we had 8 of them here in Wisconsin. Tomah, Hayward, Wittenberg, Neilsville, Oneida, there's residential schools there. If you ever go to Tomah to the VA, the school still stands, it's still there. And so a lot of these residential schools didn't close until the 1980s and 1990s. So I graduated in 1993, so these are people my age who went through residential schools. To know about the residential schools, you can skip, actually go back then. One of the things they did with the kids is they would go and gather the children, and they would use police officers, they would use social workers, they would use whoever to go pick up the kids, and they would do it about the time they were, some stories say potty trained, but we'll even just stick with about age 5. They go pick up the kids, and they take them off to the residential schools. As you kind of heard in the video, they show up, they're given new names. So think about that for a second. So remember that list I had you make? You don't get your name anymore. You're now given a new name. Same with you show up and maybe you've only spoken your native language, you now have to only speak English, okay? So that was taken away from them. Their clothing was taken away from them. They were now removed from anybody they loved. Their best friends, they couldn't have best friends in residential schools. So that they lost all of that. So that whole list you wrote, you can just cross it all off, because if you went to residential school, chances are you lost most of that. And so our kids would be at these residential schools. They'd stay there till 16, 18 years old. Sometimes they could come home in the summer and breaks, but a lot of times they'd stay. A lot of times, too, there would be disease that would go through the schools and wipe out entire populations that are there, and the families would never know what happened to their kids either. It's not like they made sure to send the kids' remains back home. And so they would just get buried in unmarked graves, sometimes marked graves. And, but let's say the kids did survive all of that, and now they're gonna go back home at 16, 18 years old. How welcome do you think they feel back on their reservations? Do you think if they're not allowed to speak the language, can they speak the language when they get back? Not usually. Sometimes some of them were able to hold on to it and kept it. They didn't really feel like they belonged because they missed out on a lot of the culture and the teachings. And now they're gonna, let's say they get married. How do we learn how to be a parent? Who do we learn from? Usually our parents, right? Good or bad, we learn how to be a parent. These kids at residential school, their parents were these teachers and these priests and nuns that did not treat them well, okay? And there were some good schools and there were some good ones, yes, but overall the treatment was not a good one. So if they stepped out of line, they got beat. They got sexually abused. These things didn't occur in our community until residential schools happened. We didn't have these problems, okay? So now they come home and they're bringing all of this with them. And then to escape the pain, starting using alcohol, drugs. They have kids, they don't know how to parent. And if you think about people still my age that went to residential school, these are still some of the issues we face today. And also why our families might not be comfortable in schools, right? Because we pass this information down, this trauma. It's embedded in our DNA too. I don't know if anyone's ever learned about depression and how depression can be passed down from generation to generation. Our historical and intergenerational trauma is passed on like that too, from generation to generation. So it's stuff to keep in mind. I don't know where he's going. These are just some pictures. This shows you before and after, same kid. So when he arrived at Carlisle and then when he left. This shows you Carlisle Indian School in 1900, all the kids there. And then this was a story that was brought back. Winona LaDuke went out to Carlisle and she had posted this picture on Facebook. She said this was an LCO tribal member. And I happened to look at it, and Quagan was my grandmother's last name. This is one of my relatives that went to Carlisle and was buried. He didn't come back. Shows more pictures too, the befores and afters. Go. Now, when we start comparing these things that have happened with us as Native people, and we start looking at our African American or our Black students, do they have historical trauma? Yeah. What about your Hmong students? Is there historical trauma there? Yeah. What about LGBT students? Your Latino students? There's trauma. And so in the video, they talked about how sometimes our kids are walking around and they're angry. They don't know why they're angry. So what do we do to help with this? What do we think the first step is? Anybody got any ideas? I'm seriously asking, like, what's our first step? Acknowledge it is huge, right? Don't deny that it happened. Don't whitewash our history. Big time, yeah. What else can we do? From this morning, what was one of the biggest things the keynote talked about that saved him? Relationships, right? Getting to know our students and having that trust, but knowing that your students of color have a hard time sometimes with that trust, right? Why our families, if a teacher calls home and they don't return the phone call, for those of you who don't know, if you're trying to get a hold of our families too, sometimes calling us and we'll help you get a hold of parents. That's why we have our job, is to be that liaison between home and schools, because we know that this trauma is there. So come to us too. Use us, please. Let us help you connect with our families. Okay, next one. All right. So, we'll go back then. I think we got some time for questions too, but before we get to that, although I really talked fast, didn't I? So when talking about how this impacts our classrooms, what are some things that we can do in our classrooms when teaching? Do I have history teachers? What? Books. Books. Alyssa says books. Okay. Why is that huge?
It's huge because it not only allows for kids who in our classrooms may be Indigenous, but other kids to understand and realize the impact, and especially local Indigenous. Chum, which is like...
We love Alyssa. Other ones. What else can we do in our classrooms? If we're teaching history and we have to teach about manifest destiny, what can we do? Go ahead.
Cover all viewpoints.
Provide some multiple viewpoints, yeah.
Continue to learn what we don't know.
Okay. Continue learning. Did you learn some new people you can maybe call on that are more than happy to help? So the video we watch, usually it's like I said, it's an hour and 13 minutes. So if you want us to come in and do more training in your schools, we've been in 3 of the La Crosse schools already. We're more than willing to come in and do the whole training, the whole hour and 45 minutes. I think it usually takes or close to 2 hours depending on questions. We will do that so we can kind of go more into detail. But what about books like Little House on the Prairie? Are there any problems with a book like Little House on the Prairie in our classroom? Anybody read Little House on the Prairie? Yeah. What are our thoughts on that book?
That book and other books misinterpret what Native people look like and who they were and perspectives that still continue and are perpetuated today.
Okay.
So it's ideal to identify, maybe not throw them out completely, but to identify why it may be problematic, why it is problematic, and why it will continue to perpetuate the stereotypes and biases. And so our kids can learn how to be critical thinkers as they are reading and they are unlearning and relearning like we are.
Okay. What were you going to say, Simona?
Well, it basically, I was going to say whitewash, which is pun intended, or political inferences, but it's based on a little girl's experience, and her experience is one of innocence.
So could you teach that book at all? Could you use it in any way in a classroom? Go ahead.
I think I just read that book last year, and I don't remember anything stereotypical. The crime with that book, if there is a crime, is omission of not presenting the parallel lifestyle of the Native Americans living in that history period. I mean, that's what I would see. So I don't remember that book as being overtly racism only through omission. And omission is a crime, but can you refresh my mind on what scene would you object to in that book that you think? I'm just trying to...
I can't remember exact page numbers. So I went through that book and I postmarked how many times Ma talked about how much she hated the Indians and how dirty they are and their snake-like eyes. And so if you're an Indigenous child sitting in that classroom reading that book, but if you're not Indigenous and you don't know any other Native people, how will that frame your viewpoint? So one question I have here too. So there's 4 of us here that work at the center. How many of you think, I'm trying to think how I want to ask that. Do you think we're all Native? Some people know this answer already because they've heard us. We all are. We come in many different shades and colors, right? So we all are Native that work at our center. And it's hard for all of us sometimes because people assume. I get a lot of assumptions about my ethnicity. Vince gets a lot about his because they'll assume one identity. Henry has some great experiences too in our community. We get misidentified a lot, and so do our kids. And that's the big thing to know. You may have no idea that you have a Native kid sitting in your class because they don't always want to talk about, because then they're always like called on, like, oh, tell us how many tribes are in Wisconsin. Tracy wants to talk.
This is weird for me because Elizabeth and I have never presented on this together. We have different presentations, so I'm just like sitting back and letting her do the thing. But, so as I was growing up, what I look like, what Henry looks like, that's what I was used to. It wasn't until I was an adult that I started to realize that Native people look like Elizabeth, look like Vince. I have blonde grandkids. I am now at the point where I don't assume that a room does not have any Native people in it, because it is strictly a scientific point that people imagine that all Native people are going to look like Henry or I. So that is something to keep in mind. And a lot of these kids still are affected by that stereotype of what a Native person is supposed to look like. So sometimes they will not identify because they're like, nobody's going to believe me because my hair is really light. And there is this craziness where in communities of color, a lot of times you were treated better the lighter you were. But now a lot of our people who are lighter skinned are feeling the opposite from our own people. And we're trying to help, especially the kids that we see every day. We want to help them appreciate their entire person and let them know that it doesn't matter what you're looking like, it's how you live. Because that video that we were watching is it comes from White Bison, and one of their programs is a healing circle, mending broken hearts, and I'm trained for that one. And what we're trying to help people do is get over to acknowledge their trauma. And one of the most important things to take away from that is decolonization. And that is something I try and instill in our kids, is decolonizing. Our kinship structure is different. I try and help the kids understand how that structure works. We don't have cousins as ho-chunks. I try and help them learn that because a lot of them don't know it because their parents weren't raised knowing that because it was better to be safe. You were safer if you were fitting in and assimilated. I don't want to see these children assimilated. I don't want them to have to act white to be successful. I want them to be proud of who they are. So that is something that we're constantly struggling to make sure that our kids know, because that Mending Broken Hearts program is for adults and elders. It's hard enough for them, but I'm still trying to do this with kids who are dealing with all kinds of trauma because, like we said, it's in our DNA. My DNA does not let my brain produce the serotonin it needs. It just doesn't. Also, Native Americans, likely their DNA, we don't have the gene that tells us when to stop drinking. Most other people, there's something in their brain that'll tell them you need to stop or slow down. We don't have that. So that's something that's carried through onto these kids. And it's going to take us years to turn that back around, but that's what we do.
And one of the things that is interesting too is Tracy and I are out in our community speaking quite a bit, and I can't tell you how many times people confuse the two of us. We find it funny. Like, we'll call people. I called someone a couple weeks ago, and they emailed Tracy, sorry, I missed your call. I was like, but yeah, we are two different people. Just throw that out there. So questions. I mean, there's so much more we can talk about, and I can keep going, trust me, but yeah.
I could probably talk loud enough. I actually am, at the risk of being booed here, I'm not a teacher, I'm a CPS social worker, so.
We're glad you're here.
Thank you. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that relationship building, that trust. You were mentioning that it might be hard to, for example, get a call back from a family if you're reaching out to parents. In the CPS system, we go through a lot of training about recognizing and being culturally sensitive when we're working with Native people, and even something as simple as the process of a discussion or a conversation, or the time that you wait when you're listening, things like that. So can you talk a little bit about how kind of that European culture is needing to be put in the back seat when you're having those interactions with Native families, and what do people do differently?
So the first thing I will challenge is our schools. When a parent or guardian walks into the school, how are they greeted? What are they greeted with? Number one, okay? Same with any emails or anything on websites for the county for social workers. How inclusive is the wording? What terms are being used? Now, I'm gonna throw it out there. Lincoln is working really hard at putting up signage in multiple languages, right? They've got Hmong, they've got Spanish, and they're adding Ho-Chunk too. And so when you walk into that building and you see multiple languages, even if that's not the language you speak, right? Like I do speak some Ho-Chunk, but just seeing it up there in that acknowledgement, that's a huge step to feel welcome in a school. What about in a classroom? Teachers who send out letters. Open house was last night for every school in La Crosse except I think Hamilton, and I don't know if there was another one that didn't have open house last night. How inviting was that letter that went home? You know, were multiple languages being used? And for your families that don't show up, and this puts a lot on teachers, but do you call the families? Do you send an email? So those are ways to reach out to parents. I had that happen. I didn't go one year, and I had the teacher email me and say, hey, I'm sorry we missed Josie at open house. So that meant a lot.
I've got 3 kids in the district, and I did not go to open house last night. Yes, the school that my children belong to, they're pretty good schools, but I didn't make it to the open house last night, and actually I chose not to go. And it would be good if I did get a follow-up. It would be great. And even to go back, how relevant do you guys think this training is for today? A lot of historical information, right? So do you guys ever think you're going to run into somebody who has attended a residential boarding school? I'm a survivor.
Okay, I thought I was gonna keep talking. So those would just be some little things to reach out, and then just making that attempt to get to know the family you're working with. Like if you know they're Native, I get this assumption a lot because I work for the Ho-Chunk Nation. They assume I'm Ho-Chunk, even though we're pretty open about being LCO. But making sure you know the tribe that the family belongs to. Those little pieces are huge, but reaching out, like Henry said, if someone would call him and say, hey, we missed you at open house, those pieces are huge to do, like those emails and stuff. So, anyone else?
Well, just with schools up, there's starting to be a change, but historically, even outside of boarding schools, Native children were just automatically put into special education. My son in first grade, they said, well, we did some testing and we think he needs special education. Now, my son is 25 right now. I knew better. And I actually took him to the hospital to the neurologist who had treated him for a head trauma. And they were like, I don't know what test they're using. He's above average. He's Native. He might learn a little bit different, so it's automatically assumed he would be in special education. So you have the special education kind of thing going on. You have the boarding schools historically. Do you think parents trust schools? No. And these parents are already dealing with enough to try and survive with their families. They're not going to be the ones who are willing to put forward that effort right now. So it does need to be educators. if you really want our kids to be successful and happy, you do have to take that extra step for our kids. I know you guys do so much already, but we need you to do a little bit more.
Yes, I know most of you had a chance to hear the keynote speaker today. And I really enjoyed his message. And, you know, it was unorthodox, but he said his change happened after when he was listening, when he started doing some rap. Oh, that sounds funny, don't it? Wow, rap? Changed a guy like that? A guy that basically, you're talking about his life, what we just seen on the screen happened to hundreds of millions of people. And his life was like that. But it changed him. Now, when we started that video a few minutes ago, one of the first things the elder said, which is a key component, that's why we all in here right here today, is his healing that's supposed to start. We're part of that. That's what we're here to do, is help heal our youth and help heal everyone. And you're part of it. But you can't do it unless you have us working with you and you working with us. We know some things that you just don't know. Vice versa, okay? So this healing has to happen, and it's gonna happen with your work. When our kids come in there, you don't know, like she said, you don't know. You don't know by colors. You just don't know by colors who's got native in them. You don't. Or whatever. Your responsibilities, though, is to educate the youth. And I know it's tough. My mom was a school teacher. My aunt was a school teacher. My uncle was a principal. I know it's difficult. But for us to get to where we need to be one day, this is the generation that's supposed to take it to the next level. And we're the start of it. And I know we have always been here to help. Most people don't know that. But I've been working here for 10 years, and there's still people in the system in these areas, lacrosse, don't even know we exist. Very similar to, on the native perspective of it, because I've lived in both worlds, native, black, Caucasian, and I have a little Asian in me too, so I got them all in me. I never lived in the Asian part of it. So we have to be willing to work on this. This is something that's serious. You're gonna face it. My kids are in this school system too. You know, one looks Caucasian, one looks black, one looks native. I deal with all three of them, and they got it all in them. Now, how is the teachers gonna look at them? How are they gonna teach them? Okay, this is serious stuff, but it's stuff that if we work on it, it'll make your teaching better. It'll make it easier, because you can understand how they think and what they're feeling. You will actually become part of them. Then you put everything into it.
And keep in mind that you're also affecting all of the other students. You'll have more compassion, empathetic, you know, empathy. They'll have more empathy. Your other students will. They need it just as much as our native students.
Other questions? We still have a few minutes. I mean, we can talk a long time. Go ahead.
So you mentioned about not wanting kids to assimilate. So as I move forward and try to be more aware of when I am kind of propagating, I guess, assimilation, are there any tips you guys can give? Like, here's some things that we've noticed that like people do, like very common mistakes that actually lead to, I guess, unintentionally trying to get these kids to assimilate as opposed to be more culturally sensitive. Does that make sense?
I think we're finally past this point where you speak only English. But no, actually, we're not past that point. We're not. If you have a child in that school who is speaking their native language, let them speak it. Also, if you've got kids who say, oh, but I've got 3 dads, don't correct them and say, well, no, you would only have one mother, one father, because that is not true for us. You know, when I tell you I have 19 brothers, believe me, I have 19 brothers. They are not my cousins. I have never thought of them as my cousins. Those are my brothers. Things like that. Let them live what they're being taught at home. Don't try to correct them into European thought. Yes, they need to learn the curriculum. We know that. But don't correct them when they say something that's not familiar to you. Call us. That's what we're here for. We're here for the kids and also to help you be better teachers.
I think, too, understanding why some of the kids might miss school. If you look at the trauma and you look at what the residential schools did, it's hard not to look at public school as being very similar, right? They're only learning English. Do you call them by if they have a Ho-Chunk name or an Ojibwe name, are you calling them by that? Or are you calling them by their Christian name or their white name? You know, so keeping in mind, like, we're still assimilating them. We make them get to school at a certain time. You know, we have just different beliefs on time. If family needs us, what is the priority? That the kid gets to school or that you go support your family? And I would kind of almost challenge everyone in here too. If your family needed you, would you say, oh no, I gotta work today? You'd be like, no, I'm gonna go help my family. But we just have different beliefs sometimes and why kids need to be where and what they need to do. And just kind of maybe talking, like, and if we're back at Central once a week, you know, come chat with us more, because we'll tell you more than you probably want to know, because we'll talk forever. But so there are just little things like that, I think, too, that are big things. Just like Tracy said, just keeping in mind that when they tell you something that goes against what you think, ask us if you don't want to ask them. And don't always put them on the spot, because sometimes they can't always explain it. They don't feel comfortable explaining what that means. So please use us to help you with that. So, other questions? That I saw another hand. Go ahead.
How do you approach students who've been so integrated that they don't know their own heritage?
We're struggling with that. It was, like I said, it was safer to just act like you were white. And so then those next generations have that same thing. We have lots of kids whose parents don't know their clan. So luckily between me and Henry, we can usually figure out the Ho-Chunk kids. And Elizabeth has helped us with a couple of the Ojibwe kids that we have. It kind of depends on the family. And if the kid is telling you that they're Native, you know, reach out to the parent. Say, you know what, you know, your child has told us that you have Native blood. You know, I'd love to hear more about that. And if maybe there's somebody that's struggling, you could suggest, you know what, there's a youth and learning center here that works with all Native youth. Because we're Title VII, so that means we work with all Native youth. They don't have to be enrolled. Their grandparent was enrolled. We can work with them. You know, refer them to us. You know, that's the thing is, so that's part of the reason that they're struggling is their identity is in crisis. Because they may know that they're Ho-Chunk, but they don't maybe really know what that means. And we are in no way experts, but we can try and help them get on that road to rediscovering what that means. You know, because there's a huge diversity within the Ho-Chunk Nation, but we can help. You know, with our after-school program, I teach some of the crafts. We try and use the Ho-Chunk language, because even if they're not Ho-Chunk, they're starting to learn the patterns and the syntax of an indigenous language that will help them if they're with their own language sometime in the future. You know, we're just trying to nurture them the best that we can, so that, because for me, if I didn't know what my family's history and culture was, I would not be as stable as I am, whatever that level is. But it's taken me a long time to get here. I want to help these kids before they start making the mistakes that I did. I was a high school dropout. I was doing drugs. I was an adult before I finally figured out what I needed. I want to get these kids before they get through that stage like I did. So, you know, just ask them. You know, it's still just another person.
We might have time for one more question. Oh. I didn't use my teacher voice. Go ahead.
When you talk about the time of healing, and if you look out like 50 to 100 years, what is that in your mind? What does that look like for you? For us?
As Vince said, this is our generation where that healing it should be coming with this generation. 50 years from now, I might get in trouble with this answer, so I got to think about this. You know, we have become a society that has gone to synthetic food and synthetic medication, and you know, we don't heal, we just give medication, and then you need more medication for that medication. And if we go back to some of our traditional ways with healing and our food, we didn't have some of the disease, the sickness, we didn't have the diabetes, you know. So 50 years from now, it'd be really nice to see us going back to a much more simpler traditional way of life, eating the food we're supposed to eat, using the natural remedies that are here. I guess that's, in my mind, what I'd like to see, but.
Can you tell Henry's not a big speaker?
But you can talk to me after the presentation.
Yes. For me, it's about acculturation rather than assimilation. We, in reality, have to live in both worlds, so we might as well be good at living in both. That's what I strive for. Is I try to be acculturated. I remember I'm Ho-Chunk all the time, but I still live in a white society. I will push against it. People who are from La Crosse probably know that I do, but I want to teach these kids how to live in both worlds successfully.
I'm in agreement with them. I think we don't believe in nothing is perfection right here. That's how we do it. We believe in leaving something, even when we make it, leave an imperfection. So nothing is going to be perfect. But I think the vision is that we will become more of one man, meaning that we'll have more love for each other. We'll have more respect for each other. We'll be more humble and humility for each other. The 7 teachings that we kind of go by, that we'll have more of that. And if we got more of that, we'll be in a better place. We won't be perfect, but we'll be in a better place. That's the way I see it.
You want to say thank you and what
So on behalf of the rest of the staff, Wa'ini Ganapwi, thank you, and hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
And then I say Chimigwich, and if you want to come and give us your email address if you want one of the handouts that listed out more trauma. But thank you all for what you do, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.